so a couple of things on the table I'll go over in a minute. Let's see, let me find where I... was looking up some information about Bedouin herding. For reasons I will explain later. Classification of root systems. I need to read through this. Ah, shit. Is PDF available? Yes. No. Damn. Maybe there's enough in the intro to work off of. What a world. Okay, so I added grazing animal intensity. Hey, Isdar. Two things I think I need to do here. I need a seed bank for grass-like I'm not trying to say a seed bank for grass-like plants, so grasses. And then I need to factor in grazing animal intensity in a given area. And the interesting thing is, it seems that a lot of grasslands only exist as grasslands because there is regular animal grazing that destroys smaller trees. If a tree can't grow fast enough, the grazing animals come through and they basically chew it up, which creates a situation where trees can't get a reasonable foothold in a biome. Okay, so let's see. There's two things we want to do here. We want to add in, because we have rainfall deviation. Let's run this model. What do we have right now? So this grasslands. Okay, so currently we are activating climate grassland. I mean, in some situations, so for example, here is sort of a oops, what did I do here? So here's kind of a grassland, right? Sort of a mid-grass prairie. And you can see how there's a lot of deviation in here. It really resembles more like a savanna on the Sahel. Because the trees are permitted to grow unimpeded by anything other than like wildfire. And so, here, let me go ahead and shut off songs. Occasionally you have periods of primary succession, but theoretically, you can imagine if we inject some grazers into this formula, and you get one of these primary succession events, then the grazers, in theory, should be able to constrain the growth of trees and scrub. Let's look at canopy height. Let's see how low canopy height gets. So, right. The idea is grazers become ineffectual once the average canopy height gets above a certain point. And so then they're not able to efficiently kill the trees off as a side consequence of their grazing activity. And so the question is, will our primary succession events be enough to knock canopy down low enough and tree numbers down low enough that the grazers can then come in and constrain them, right? Okay. Right, so we'll be adding in grazers to this equation, and we'll be adding in grass and forb seed banks so that when a fire rolls through, the seeds will be able to rejuvenate the grass population quickly. But this will only happen if the grasses have a chance to build up a seed bank. So normally when we reach carrying capacity, of or like 100% land cover, the grasses should still technically be producing seeds. They just end up going into the seed bank and waiting for an opportunity to grow when a disturbance rolls through. So first what we'll do, we have a couple of primary succession events here. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and add in our grazers first. So we've off stream, I was working on things for a few hours. I did some research. I added in this new variable called grazing animal intensity, which will be a proxy for now for grazing animals. In the actual game, we want herds of grazing animals to be moving around the map, looking for the best places to graze. So there will be periods where they will hang out in the province, graze there until they've sort of grazed down the area so there's not as much, and then they'll leave to go for greener pastures, so to speak, right? So for now, it's just kind of a proxy, but we need to actually have this variable do something. Question is, here's the tricky part too. Like, the grazers are going to be eating the grass as well. But grass is supposed to grow substantially faster than everything else when it isn't crowded. So, So we may have to jack up, what is grass's base growth rate currently? It's currently, it's actually 4, okay. When it has sufficient water and nutrients, it can grow like crazy by exploiting sunlight because it has broad, it has relatively broad leaves, so to speak. Okay, so I think these values should be good. So let's go ahead. Right now, if we run the model, this is a sort of mid-grass prairie. So this is sort of like, I guess you could say Kansas, right? So right now, with no grazers, we have a mix of trees, shrubs, and grasses. And depending on whether there was a recent disturbance, the values kind of hop around a little bit. So, when we add in grazers, where's the best place to inject it, by the way? Okay. Somebody get rid of Chad, man. Spamming us. Okay. So where do we put it? we should just have the grazers act as a disturbance. Ideally, though, after we check for fire, so turn on fires. We'll let this happen first. Broadleaf death. Alright, we got rid of the death factor. Alright, that's right, we had a death factor here. Okay, so after death, yeah, so down here. Now this should be relatively simple. We have grazing animal intensity here. We can calculate a factor called Hey, jeez, thanks. Yeah, things are settling into a new normality with COVID. Raising animal intensity. How do we want to do this? Because we want them eating the grass, but maybe what we can do is we can have the grazing animals come off and on. So they're one season, not there the next season. Something to that effect. Yeah, why not? Let's try that. Let's try. So we're just going to have just a Boolean. We'll flip back and forth. Animal intensity. If first half, I suck at Python. I'm sure my syntax is wrong. Unresolved reference to true. Why are you complaining? Yeah, no, the parentheses aren't necessary. I'll keep it anyway. Yeah, remove parentheses. I want my parentheses. Okay. So if first half. If first half graze. Right. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about goats today. And Bedouins and how it's just they've been, your sort of fringe nomadic herders in history have had such an interesting influence on settled societies. Is you always have, the settled people living in super high density with lots of people, in the green zones where you have abundant irrigable water. But then on the frontiers, you then sort of have this marginal rainfall, can't farm, but you can herd your goats type of areas that are on the fringes. And so you have a situation where the settled people can never quite completely dominate the people on the fringes who are the herders, because it's not really worth it, right? Sending armies out there constantly to subjugate them or police them isn't really economical. And so you always kind of have this force out there that settled people are trying to manage, that are nibbling, stealing cattle and raiding caravans and stuff like that. It's kind of always this potential problem. Oh, sure, yeah, and sometimes you even have mutualistic relationships where they could serve as mercenaries or even protect your trade caravans. I mean, the same thing was true with the Chinese and the steppe people, and the Byzantines and the steppe people, right? The Byzantines had a good relationship with the Khazars for centuries, But then, in the same thing you had with with various Chinese dynasties, where the steppe people could either be serving you or they could turn into a giant horde and threaten your very existence. Oh, right. You were thinking overgrazing. Sure, yeah, overgrazing. But in the same, that's true for Bedouins all through Arabia, and you have this little band across North Africa too, where you had the semi-nomadic people who had the same kind of effect. And it's just an interesting thing to consider for songs. Anyway, because I have that kind of biome right now, or the conditions for it, the Xeric Desert, where you have some rainfall, enough to grow grasses and shrubs which can be grazed by small animals like goats or camels, but which you can't really grow anything on because the rainfall just isn't high enough. And so it's not like games like Civilization, where it's like, I'm just going to plop a city here and it's going to occupy the space regardless of what the carrying capacity of the land actually is. Like in songs, you'll have areas that you'll just have to, if you're a settled society, you'll just have to manage those people as best as you can and try and stay on their good side. And give them a reason not to decide that the best interaction they can have with you is to steal from you. Alright, so now we need to add in those grazers. And these grazers right now are natural grazers. Okay, so first half equals true. This is where we can add in our grazing. Grazers eat plants, else we'll just first half equals false. Oops. There we go. There were some interesting cases in the Bronze Age, southern Levant, where the cities would still nominally own the more marginal land. They would strike a mutualistic deal with semi-nomadic herders to live there. Yeah, it's kind of seems like it would be a balancing act. Because there's a cost to maintaining a positive relationship like that. Okay, so first half. But oftentimes it's like they can furnish you with special goods that you can't get on your own. Particularly goods that are the result of refinement of the dairy products they produce. You go back to the Khazars, it's really interesting that the kind of trade that went back and forth between Thrace and Crimea. Alright, what are we trying to do here? Will the presence of animals cause more oceanic and temperate lands? Can you elaborate? This is tricky because I feel almost like I don't want to have to get. Maybe we can just assume that the population modifies itself. Because I don't want to have to model animal populations at the moment because it's just going to get flushed down the toilet. Because we'll need our own model once the game starts. Because once we start putting it into the game, because the animals are going to move around a bit. Oh, right. So, like the effects of animals causing plant climates to differ. I mean, it does, Champion of Silence. So, your trees have your deeper root structures, and will capture more of the water and release it into the atmosphere. And so, if you have a situation like in North America, where there was supposed to be much more forestation across. If there had been no grazing animals, there would have been much more forestation across North America. And if there had been more forestation across North America, that would have modified rainfall because more water would have been captured and released into the atmosphere, as opposed to draining into the soil and into the Mississippi and heading out the delta. So yeah, short answer is yeah, it should influence climates in that regard. And you would have basically seen a general shift of green in this direction toward the Rockies. Alright, so this is tricky. We gotta figure this out. Okay, let's express what we're trying to do here. We want our grazers to primarily target grasses, but we also want them to incidentally kill shrubs as well as trees with low average, as well as tiles with low average canopy height. Theoretically, the gross casualties should be worse for grasses, but in environments where we have environments that are favorable for grasses, their excessive growth should overwhelm casualties from grazers. And long term will enrich soil organics and spur additional growth. So one of the reasons that grasslands have been so awesome for agriculture is because grasses grow very quickly. The rate at which you add organics into the soil corresponds to the rate of growth of plants on the surface. Grasses are the fastest growing, the fastest growing plant category here, right? And so what happens is, when grasses start to crowd together, their growth will slow down. But when they're disturbed by things like grazers and not forest fires, but wildfires, it actually has an effect of accelerating grass growth because it clears out the grass and makes it easier for the grass to then to grow. And so you kind of have almost these natural forces pushing down the grass population, and it's continually trying to grow to catch up. And a side effect of that is that tons of organics are being dumped into the soil due to that additional growth, and then you end up with your humus soils that grasslands are so famous for. An ecosystem that's actually relatively stable won't be. I mean, you'll still have a good bit of organics in the soil, but not as OP as grasslands that are disturbed by grazers. The forests tend to be pretty good, especially. Hey, what's up, Ellie? Okay. And so we're gonna try and represent that as well. But for now, we want our grazers to primarily target grasses, but we also want them to incidentally kill shrubs as well as tiles with low average canopy height. Theoretically, the gross casualties should be worse for grasses, but environments that are favorable for grasses. Their excessive growth should overwhelm casualties from grazers, and long-term will enrich soil organics and spur additional growth. Okay. So we have to actually figure out grazing damage to particular categories of plants will depend on their frequency. So if a tile is half broadleaf, it'll be much more exposed to grazers than if tile is half broadleaf, it'll be more exposed to grazers than 1/10 broadleaf. This should create a sort of equilibrium for Sahel-like savannas, but yeah, where there are at least some trees. Okay, so grazing animal intensity. So in our grasslands, intensity is 80. Let's just convert this really quickly into 0.8. That's how much. We need some damage. Okay, graze damage defines call it standard. So our formula for the damage that's caused will be here. We want scrub to be, we want grasses to have 0 resistance to grazers. We want scrub to have partial resistance to grazers. Trees will always theoretically have better resistance to grazers than scrub, but the extent of that resistance will depend heavily on canopy height average. Because a cow, because a bison cannot eat a 20-meter tall tree. Well, that's the thing. You can still, so deer technically will eat the bark off of trees, etc., etc. So you have grazers that can put marginal pressure on trees. But really what we're looking at here is like mass herds that can basically wipe out an entire area where, where little saplings can theoretically grow. Yeah. Let's verify that, Cithril. Do deer eat tree bark? Yeah, because there used to be this issue where, it's funny, land management in, tree bark. There was actually a point in U.S. history where there was, this environmental movement where people said, oh, we love the deer that are roaming around. This was back, in sort of early 20th century. And they were like, the wolves are bad. They're killing the pretty deer. And this is me oversimplifying things. But basically when wolves when predators were mostly eradicated, it created the perverse effect of, and deer were protected and not really hunted sufficiently. It created a situation where they started wiping out like national parks because the deer population got out of control and they were just ripping up all of the younger trees and severely stunting their reproduction. Yeah. So. Yeah, I see. Yeah, winter foliage, many evergreen trees and shrubs. Yep. Yeah, from my understanding, an elephant's movements can significant the disturbance it causes with them just moving around. Yeah, Heaven B. That's a good question. The answer is it has to be. First off, we have to make way more considerations for things like memory management and performance. So a lot of the architecture specifically revolves around being able to accommodate this kind of thing. But also, we do things in pulses too, right? And there's a lot of compromising being done. So in game, we have 2 million tiles, right? But everything's not necessarily going to be done on a tile-by-tile basis. So for instance, we're not going to have our grazers migrating from tile to tile or existing in a specific tile. And so we'll end up aggregating tiles into territories that then grazing animals will roam around and things like that. And so we'll keep information about like vegetation distribution in tile, but then when we need to determine like behavioral patterns for herding animals and stuff like that, it's done at a higher level to be more performance. But that's what we're doing right now, is I'm figuring out grazing animals. Right now we're running a model here. Actually, this is going to crash probably. No, it didn't crash. And so right here what we have is we're looking at what should be a grasslands based on its conditions. But you can see it's a mix of broadleaf trees, grasses, and shrubs. And what we want to do is have our grazers, a mix of grazing and forest fires, stunt the broadleaf trees that are growing there, and instead allow the grasses to dominate in a formal grasslands. Oh, it didn't crash. I like the term territory, Isdar. I know Calandial's sort of partial to province, but I like territory because a territory can be settled. You think province and you think like settled people, but a territory is like, it could be wilderness, it could be inhabited by feral, nomadic people, or it can be settled. So I kind of like territory. Okay, so first half, so we're figuring out, we want grasses to be zero resistance to graze, we want shrubs to have partial resistance to grazers. Trees will always theoretically have better resistance to grazers than scrub. The extent of that resistance will depend heavily on canopy height average. Okay, so let's do that. So this is our standard damage that's done. Here's our grazing modifier. Then we need to do our seed bank after this. Grazing modifier. Okay, so this is going to be modified by resistance. So actually, let's just do this. Grazing modifier. We'll want to move this someplace upstairs later. Oops. I'm surprised it didn't crash because I just had this code lingering out there. And then I had this. No, I guess this technically works. Okay. So grazing modifier is going to be based on grazing animal intensity divided by 100 times just the graze damage standard, which we'll move to some defines later. Now we want a shrub. Grazing resistance. This could actually, we could make this part of the shrubbery's innate characteristics too. We can refactor all this later. So shrub grazing resistance, let's just make it twice as resistant as grasses. So it's just going to be grazing modifier times 0.5. Yeah, we're going to want to modify all this later because we'll need to tune it, I'm sure. Conifer grazing resistance is going to be more complex. Broadleaf grazing resistance. Shrubs grazing resistance is going to be uniform regardless of conditions. But conifer grazing resistance and broadleaf grazing resistance will be relative to their canopy height. We can assume at any given time. There's going to be some saplings regardless of canopy height. But when you have shorter trees, we can assume in general that a lot of them are going to be continually smaller. It'll be easier to trample smaller plants in addition to eating them. So even if they're not grazing the saplings, they could be doing, the large movement of animals is enough to either compact the roots to make them less competitive or knock them over or whatever. So we want, first off, we want it to be based on the grazing modifier. We want it to already be we already want it to be up to the shrub grazing standard. So now it's just a matter of taking the height of the average height of the trees. Conifer height. I wonder how to best do this. It's just question's kind of like at what point do we really want grazing animals to have virtually no influence? I think it should be relatively soon. So actually, if we go back to our model, here, let's do this. We go back to our model. Let's look at when canopy height dips down low enough. Right. So you can see we have periods over 1,000 years where canopy height is low enough that grazers can keep things in check, right? So we have periods where it dips down to about 5, periods where, oh, I'll be right back. So question is, at what point do we want to cut off the influence of grazers? Maybe 10, 15? I say 15. Well, how about this? Better idea. Why don't we make it modifiable? Grazing canopy ceiling. So we'll say the ceiling is 15 for now, and then we can just make that like the we can just kind of we can make it like the denominator of our factor. So it'll be like tile conifer height divided by grazing canopy ceiling. The thing is, we can so what's the actual damage that's done? Grazing damage standard. Right, okay, so for grasses, assuming we have 100% grazing capacity, grasses would lose 20%. That doesn't include the actual casualties though, but 20% casualties. Shrubs would be 10% casualties. The resistance that the trees would have. See, but we actually want it to be invert. Do this. If tile conifer height is greater than or equal to 15, conifer grazing resistance basically just means that there's 0 damage caused. I think that should work. Grazing resistance, top conifer height, grazing ceiling. Otherwise, we just do the first off, let's declare this variable just to be safe. Broadleaf grazing resistance equals 0. Okay, so let's to economize on our code. If less than 15. Then we do the calculations. So it's set to 0 by default, assuming it's taller, but if it's not taller, then we do the actual calculations. Conifer grazing resistance equals grazing modifier times blah 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 times I think it needs to be conifer height. Into parentheses hell here. Let's say the conifer height, let's say it's 5, right? Oops. And it would end up being 0.66. And we would put the ceiling in here. So that way we can modify the equation from the defines. Okay. Now we want to do the same thing with broadleafs. Oops. There. Broadleaf grazing resistance, blah blah blah. Heights, grazing canopy ceiling. Okay. So let's do some hypotheticals. No. Okay, so now when we calculate our casualties, we actually, so here's the thing. When we calculate our casualties, we want casualties to be based on the exposure of the particular vegetation type. So let's say we have 30,000 grass, shrubs, we have 10,000s. For argument's sake, we can say we have 5,000s. Better yet, let's cut down on our trees here. 5,000s, 5,000s. When you add them all together, we have 100% land cover. So that means grass exposure is 0.666. So shrub is 0.33 or something. Oh, 0.166. 0.1666. And 0.88. 0.08. Right. So here is the exposure value of each. But now let's calculate the resistance, and then we can come up with casualties for each one, and then we can just go through the math before we execute. Okay, so the grass damage standard is going to be a base value, but then we're going to factor in its exposure. So 0.66 times 0.2. So its total casualties are going to be 0.132 of its original value, right? And so that's going to be times 40,000. Wow, 5820. So that's how many are going to get killed off. Our shrubs are going to lose 166. Is that right? So they So their innate resistance is 0.1. They have 1/4 the exposure of grass. Still seems seems odd. Hold on. 40,000 0.666. Let's just 0.1 times 0.166. I mean, the formula, I'm getting the right results based on the formula, but oh, did I not? No, that is exposure. We're doing something wrong here. I don't think I need the exposure factor. I think because that's implicit when we calculate casualties. So let's do 0.2, 0.1. Oh, There is, okay, so if we have 80% grazing saturation or whatever, we need to include it here. So 0.2 times 0.8. So roughly the same casualty for grasses. Shrubs. It's more like it. 800. I'll be right back. Now the trees, our trees are going to be more complex. So it's going to be at least 0.1. Let's say our canopy heights. Canopy heights is 8 and 5 respectively. Alright, that means so conifer casualties come to 5,000 times 0.1 times 0.466 times 0.8. So we end up losing 186.4. Broadleafs 0.1 times 0.66 times 0.8 times 5,000. 264. I guess we're gonna have to figure out whether that's too austere. We'll see. We may want a stronger base factor. for trees so that they're naturally more resistant, but we'll see. So now we can actually calculate casualties. Tile, grass. It's going to equal tile, grass, minus tile, grass. Mocha, it's going to be ported over to C# anyway, so these are Demian conventions. Tile, grass times all of those factors. In this case, it's just the global standard. Or did we calculate that? Damage standard, grass damage standard. Yeah, I guess we can use this, right? Nah, I think this is useless. Well, graze damage standard. No, actually, we can do this. Can we? Graze damage standard. Yes. Okay. Yes, this works. So grazing modifier times nothing, because this is grass. It has no resistance to grazers. Oh, I didn't realize that. I can add them in when I port back. Tile shrubs. Alright, so that cuts it in half. Now here is where things get more complex. Tile, conifers, graze modifier, now we add in all of this fancy schmancy. Okay. So let's look at the results. This is totally untuned. In fact, let's get a baseline first. So this is what things look like before grazers for thousands seasons. I have no idea how this is going to turn out, because now dealing with a weird situation where are we just not going to have fires if grazers graze things back sufficiently? Well, here, let's generate it again. We'll take a snip of what it looked like here. back in the grazers and see what it does. What? No. No. That's not what you were supposed to do. Oh. I must have messed something up. So apparently what our grazers are doing is they're wandering around just like not eating anything, but instead they're just puking up trees. And they're artificially inflating the tree population. Did I... Hold on. Was that calculating a negative value and then subtracting that negative value? I don't think so, because... Hold on. New tile grass. Okay, let's do this. Grass casualties. Broadleaf casualties. I'm making it impossible to steal and reasonably add anything to. Man, what happened? What happened with our grazers? Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna comment that stuff out down there. Oops. What was the canopy height? Okay, so we're gonna comment. So there's not gonna be any influence. Well, yeah, we'll have some influence. So what we're gonna do now is we're just gonna print it out. I think what's happening here is the trees are growing tall enough that they can't be influenced, and so the grazers are just killing off all of the tree's competitors, which is something that I thought could happen, but and I think the grass is being crowded out, so then it can't really grow, and so I just assumed the grass growth would be fast enough. But what's weird is, oops, I feel like once grass is, I don't know. All right, let's see. Oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, the canopy gets tall enough where it just like becomes invulnerable, and it how strange. Okay. Fascinating. The grazers seem to have like stabilized the ecosystem. and pushed it toward a mixed conifer broadleaf like equilibrium. Okay. Yeah. So we end up with a situation where we have grass casualties of 512, shrub casualties of 55, conifer casualties of 0, broadleaf casualties of 0. I'm confused though. Why aren't we having those devastating fires like before? They should still be happening because they're grazing. They're just... So one of the issues is, in this type of scenario, what should happen is the grazers would basically give a competitive advantage to the trees, which would then cause the grazers' population to decline. And then you'd eventually come into an equilibrium where you would have, grass at a slightly higher quantity. So the canopy at this point never falls low enough for the grazers ever to do much ever again. But why? We still have some pretty severe fires, but no ecosystem resetting fires. What's weird, I guess... grasses aren't being totally stunted. Shrubs get wiped out, pretty much. Which is theoretically fine. Yeah, the grazers never leave. That's part of the issue now. But I'm trying to understand why fires. So here's the other situation. Right? We have these, but this is without grazers. You have, on a fairly regular basis, ecosystem resetting fires that just, boom, they basically turn everything back to primary succession. But why? Why are there... Here, let's see something. I might have a suspicion as to why that's happening. We can dig into the data in more detail. Migrating trees. So here's our pop history. Let's just do an auto sum. Whoops. Huh. Okay. I think we're not getting the kind of devastating fires we were before because grazers are actually keeping the biomass depressed. That's interesting. It could be Champion of Silence. We'll see. It really just depends on work-life issues and COVID and etc. As you can see, where we have some fires and things try to regrow. I honest to goodness think if we can, are there any points where the grass is? See, this is the. I think I know what one of the issues is. I think crowding factor for grass is just too aggressive. We need grass to be able to fill the vacuum faster, and then we can add in a seed bank variable. Alright, so this is what we're going to do. Let's go back. We have so many more interesting things constraining growth now than just crowding. So we really need to update crowding. Crowding factor 1. Oh yeah, holy crap. Way too austere. I think this will go a long way. This is not good practice, but let's just see what happens here. Okay. Hold on. Let's see what happens here. Holy fuck. No. I think we may have overcompensated just a little bit. I mean, it's kind of interesting. So a couple of things here. Let's see. Don't need you to be ludicrously high anymore, but it's still gonna. Yeah, we're not having that long-term suppressive effect that we were hoping for. Instead, we're just getting. I mean, this is appropriate for like the Sahel, for a savanna, perhaps, but it's still too wild. It's still much too wild. Final succession. So I was expecting, if we look at our casualties, grass casualties. Yeah, so grass is being numbed pretty quickly, but it's growing nice and fast. So the grass is doing what it's supposed to do, and it's more or less shrugging off the pain from the grazers. But here's the problem right here. Virtually no casualties. Okay, here we have some broadleaf casualties, right? I feel like we need more side-by-side data really to do much here, though. Broadleaf casualties only 39. I bet you anything that maybe there's just something wrong with our calculations here. It's 40 casualties. I wish I had the population written down here too. Let's do that, right? Broadleaf. So before we subtract, you know what? We can even say canopy height too. Broadleaf canopy. What's interesting is the grazing is sufficient to wipe out our conifers. Which is sort of what we want. Okay. And even the canopy gets low enough that they should take a hit from grazing. So let's just look at the figures here. Broadleaf abundance. Holy fuck. Okay, there's our problem. We have, well, what's the canopy? Broadleaf canopy. Okay, so the canopy is within the range that it should be taking a hit. But we're only losing 47 broadleaves. We're going to have to investigate this in a moment. I'll be right back, though. Something is obviously wrong. so we did not have nearly enough dead trees. So we have some actual results. Let's see if they conform with the calculations that we have. So you would have, alright, so if we have 27,000 broadleaf trees, multiply by the base factor times actual grazing animal abundance. See, this is what's crazy. In our previous calculation, we only had 5,000 individuals with a canopy height of 10. Yeah, so we should have way more trees getting killed here. What is going on? Okay, so 0.8, 0.1. Here is a spot that has to be malfunctioning. So what was our canopy height here? Canopy height was 10.89, which well, maybe this is accurate. Let's see. Let's just say 11. See what we got. $27,000. Yeah, so the casualties we should have is 561. We ended up with 47. Where did we go wrong? Okay, I think we deviated from our equation somehow. I think our grazing resistance. Okay. Yeah, basically division by 12 somewhere. Okay, so let's just check our broadleaf grazing resistance here. Okay, so standard damage is 0.2. Okay, grazing modifier. Okay, so grazing modifier should be fine. We cut that in half because by default trees are twice as resistant. So now we take our height. Let's say 11 minus our ceiling, which is 15. Effectively multiply by -1. Divided by our ceiling again, 0.266. It looks right. Times 0.5. Times 0.8 times 0.2. Weird. Not for grazing resistance. Okay. I see where the problem is. No, I double. I apply the resistance twice. See, I'm double. This doesn't need to be here. Right, because the grazing modifier, okay, so I'm cutting down on it twice. Okay. This is all we really need. And now I'm nervous again because it's like, all right, found the problem, but am I just gonna get screwy results again? Here's my prediction. My prediction is we are just gonna end up creating a excessively stable ecosystem with very few disturbances, with very few severe fires. Oh, or I'm just gonna have some syntactical bug somewhere. Oh, yeah. I want to get rid of that. Weird. Or it's just gonna do practically nothing. Did I miss something? That's weird. Hold on. Oh, it's gonna do nothing because. God damn it. Because I had this calculations wrong twice? Okay. This is what we're gonna do. Oops. Simplify this. Okay. This time we get the moment of truth. I'm nervous all over again. Okay, so stable. Stable, Cithril. Stable. Here it goes. I predict stable, which is, or just nothing. Or it'll just be the exact same fucking thing as before. At least see if we have realistic casualty figures. So what's supposed to happen? Yeah, we got about the casualties that we were expecting. But it is not doing enough to suppress broadleaf trees. Why is that? We're still apparently getting fires. Here's all of our averages. Is it even doing much to suppress broadleafs long term, or is it just let's see. So during these periods of here's what I guess this is what's crazy. Our growth per capita for trees is like nearly that of grasses, and that seems like a problem. Why are our trees growing so quickly? Right, you can see just they shoot through the roof. Which, I mean, if you consider the time interval, yeah, and that shouldn't be happening either. It seems like, let's play around with a few things. Broadleaf base growth isn't that high. Well, here, let's try this. Got an idea. Let's just experiment. Let's crank up the intensity of the damage that grazers do. And now it just, now they just kill off grasses. Right. Well, first off, I don't have a mechanism for the seed bank. It barely seems necessary now, because grass just immediately moves into the vacuum. What's impressive is you have these phases where broadleaf trees just take over. And I feel like let's do this. Let's open up our Excel. Let's look at, well, not pop growth per capita. Well, and what astonishes me is trees, broadleaves in this case, they bounce back so quickly. Here, we can infer growth in a given year by looking at the difference between one year and another. Let's go ahead and do our auto sum. Let's see if we get to complete land cover. Yes, we do. In fact, holy moly. Okay, so we're never not at complete land cover because grass apparently just immediately jumps into the vacuum and fills it. I thought, though, and that may be what we want. We'll have to look at xeric deserts. Okay, so here we have broadleaves. They're getting their foothold. They're growing. What's weird is I'm looking at these values now. It does not look like broadleaves are growing very quickly. They're growing at about the rate they should, which is to say, not fast. And it feels like they're. Where's the herbivory? Like, we saw in our log we have casualties of 268, right? So if growth, this only occurs half the time, right? Every other season is when we get casualties. So if we go back here and we had roughly 400 here and then 200 here, that's still a good bit of downward pressure. You'd expect fire would roam through, knock things down, and then but then the casualties are only going to be per capita too. So yeah, I mean, so at this point, grasses, they're rebounding immediately. This is a grassland, remember, so we should expect shrubs and conifers to take a hit. They decline to sort of just this background noise level, which is what we want, right? You can see shrubs, they rebound a little bit and whenever there's a fire, so they're kind of at this background level. That's appropriate. It is our broadleaves that seem to rebound. Okay, so right here, for instance, here is it seems like they rebound very quickly. There's a minor fire. Still only 400-ish at a time. We're seeing slow gradual growth. I think it's like it's working the way it's supposed to. It's just not hitting that critical mass necessary to tip it over into grassland, because the effect is working on conifers, right? Broadleaves times our resistance. There's our casualties. I wonder if there just needs to be like more casualties. Let's try ramping up casualties again. Tile broadleaf equals tile broadleaf minus casualties. Yeah, let's try ramping it up. Still does not suppress them enough. So here we see that canopy is low enough to be at a level where the numbers can be suppressed. Jesus Christ, these numbers can't be right. Yeah, so we have 0.2. So each tree, for every 5 trees, you have a new tree. I guess it's not that much. Wait, what? See, this is like what I would expect the numbers to get stuck down here. What's supposed to happen is we have an event in which the canopy gets low enough that grazers should just like wreck it. Maybe we just need that effect to be more pronounced. It's a bit too gradual, probably. You know what? Let's just make this really painful. Yeah, weird, man. It just straight up benefits grass. Grass gets annihilated. It gets grazed down to nothing, and then the trees are just like, okay, our turn. Yeah, interesting. The broadleaves got tall enough that... Yeah, the broadleaves got tall enough that, like... Oh, I know what's also happening here. This is a water competition issue, too. Then the broadleaves get tall enough that they start soaking up all of the water, and then grasses can't really get a foothold. Well, so here's the tricky thing too, Dubin. Like, and I've been wondering about this. Like, I don't really know how to handle it. Like, so you have, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe we should just nix grass casualties. Because what happens when these, so when you have like a bunch of buffalo and a giant herd come through, what happens is they will superficially eat the grass, but the grasses, their root structure to surface structure ratio is very high. And so the buffalo will eat all of the top of the grass, but then the grasses will have all of this energy reserve in the roots so they can just spring back, whereas a sapling doesn't. And so when a sapling's trunk gets eaten, it's dead. When the grass gets eaten, it's not dead. So maybe what I need to do is I need to think of grass casualties differently. Maybe I just need to remove grass casualties entirely for now and just see what that does in the model. Right? And just see what happens. Interesting. Fascinating. That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. What's happening here is we have periods where we have like 100 years of grasslands, and then periods of forest, and then they convert back into grassland. Here's a period of lengthier forest, and then conversion back into grassland. feel like, hey Goodstead, I feel like the periods of forests end up having forests that are too pronounced. I don't know. And you might be onto something, Cithril, about the orders of operation. We're adding in grazing animals, Goods, at the moment, but it could be that casualties need to be mixed in with growth figures so that you have a net influence afterward, as opposed to boom, casualties, and then apparently a bunch of space frees up. That could be a bit problematic, right? So maybe I don't know. Let's see if the effect that we think we're having is actually happening. It is. Right? So here we have grazers having less of an inhibitive effect. Right? So if we were to make the damage from grazing extreme, it's still kind of odd. We have these periods where trees just seem to be growing way too fast. I have an idea, actually. Let's return to a sane value. And then let's tune back tree growth a little bit. Oh, wait a minute. Let me think about this for a second. There's only two things we have right now that are knocking out canopy growth. That is natural casualties among the trees and fires. But here's the thing. Right, so what's happening is we have periods where tree canopies get a foothold, which is fine. This is actually kind of cool. I think this is actually kind of in keeping with what we want. We may want a few more shrubs. So here's our grassland, right? Grasses dominate most of the time. You have periods where trees get a foothold before some succession event knocks them back down, right? If you go long enough with no succession event constraining canopy height, the grazers can't get to them, and so you have these little stands of trees, which then, if there is a succession event disturbance, then it gets knocked back down. Here we actually have a period where we had long enough that we had no disturbances, maybe a long wet period. I think I got rid of the canopy values. No. Do we still have them? Where? Darn, I accidentally nixed them. Okay, well here, let's run it a few more times. Let's get rid of our spreadsheet. Yeah, 10K, and that's the thing, is you can, even in grasslands, you have sometimes some trees, or periods of trees. But I'm also wondering, and you can see most of the time the trees are relatively stunty. Here we have a little period. Zoop, 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 zoop. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and remove grazers now and see what it looks like. I feel like what we need to do is have something up in our defines for debugging purposes. Here we go. Grazers on true. So let's grab you. Why are you still upset at me? If equals true, oops. I forget, Python, is it double? First off, I need my colon. There we go. Okay. So here we have grazers on. Did we change something other than that? Or is that just yikes? Okay, that's a little extreme. I messed something up here. Because this varies pretty substantially from what I had before. Did I change grass growth rate? I changed broadleaf, but then that gave me the results I was kind of expecting, which was everything being quite a bit flattened. Grass is the same as it was before. Grass growth rate isn't going to really influence any of this very much. is where it gets very quickly tipped over as we tune. Oh, that's interesting. Let's actually look at the values at that point. So, right, so here's where it gets tipped over the 302. And then we have a little period where we have some. It's interesting because this is technically what we want, right? We want a situation where you get to a critical mass where you tip over into a particular kind of biome depending on the pressures, right? And then at certain stochastic moments, boom, you can have a deviation from that norm, right? Maybe let's run this for longer and see what we get. And occasionally you have some weird stuff like this. What will be interesting is if we... So let's do this. Let's run it, and then we'll turn the animal grazing off. I feel like... yeah, it is, right. I feel like what we need to do is run this model for longer to get a longer term perspective. So yeah, let's do that. Let's go for 2,000 years. Or 5,000, excuse me. Okay. Yeah. See, I feel like so what's our average here? Huh. Well, okay, so average broadleaf, 2,807. I do feel like there's periods where we just have too much broadleaf growth too fast. Well, I could be wrong. I don't know. I wonder what average canopy height is. Broadleaf canopy average 10 meters. That's in keeping with what we want. Conifers are virtually non-existent. Like we could have some more shrubs. Right, what I'm wondering is like, what is this interval that we see here? How much time is this? It's funny, I go into the files sometimes and it's like, it looks like, oh my god, it's so fast here. And then we go into the Excel file and it's like, oh wait, no, that was actually 200 years or something. And it's like, okay, well, can a forest triple its abundance of trees in a given time, in that given time frame, and it's like, well, maybe, sure. It's those spikes that are weird. I'm wondering if something odd is going on. Let's do this. Let's go into our Excel files, pop history. Let's find one of those spikes. So at interval, okay, this is a good one. So at roughly interval 7,500 maybe? 7,500. So here we have growth really struggling. I think I know why we're seeing spikes that significant. Okay, is this where it's taken off? No, and then it goes back down. What's going on? Photos. Okay, so it's how high did it get? It got to about. It got to 20 something. See, but now we're into the 8,000s, so what the fuck happened here? Looks to me like we got up to almost 30,000, so where is that value? And then there was a fire that wiped it out, but like, I have not seen anything in the file to suggest that there was 20,000. It happened very quickly. This is, unless it was a recording error? I don't think so. 16. Yeah, here it is. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, what happened? So we had a few fires along the way, and then we had a fire that was intense enough to reset. And then it goes to the bottom, and then it rebounds, and then it goes to the bottom, and then it rebounds, and then it goes to the bottom. And I guess eventually the canopy height was sufficiently damaged. Please tell me I kept canopy height. God damn it, I didn't. Part of the issue is the trees get to a point where they're tall enough that they can resist fire reasonably well, and then also resist grazing even better. How fast did this occur? So we saw this spike, and we were like, whoa, that's crazy fast growth. This happened over the course of, 7416, and the time it took to get to the apex, 65 years. 65 years. 65 years for a forest to form. Alright, so what we need to do is we need a way to compare the canopy height. One of the issues is I feel like canopy height gyrates around quite a bit. Yeah, you can see that here. You can see there is a correspondence between canopy height and the ability of our trees to resist grazers. I'm gonna call for now. I'm kind of hungry. I think I need to eat something. I'll keep working on it off stream though afterward. Getting there, not quite where I want it to be, but an improvement. I do feel like these slight forestation periods are too abrupt. So I'll try and figure out a solution there. Alright, see you guys.